Very few big trade ideas seem realistic for the Buffalo Sabres, but there is one that's out there right now that they just might have a shot at. Can the Sabres get their hands on Canucks superstar Elias Pettersson? Maybe there's a shot. We'll talk about it. And also the Capitals game as we get rolling on another week here in Saberland. Coming up here on the Locked On Sabre podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into another week here on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Sneaky Joe DiBiase. And thanks as always for making us your first listen every day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You could also check us out on our YouTube channel where you can watch the show. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. Keep the season rolling with the big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Sneaky Joe DiBiase here on a Monday. Sabres have a couple of games this week that will begin tonight when they face off against the Washington Capitals as they are finally home after a 4-game road trip and 6 of their last 7 on the road. And actually, you could even expand that out. 9 of their last 11 have been on the road. They have a couple of home games coming up. Washington tonight. They'll be in Ottawa Thursday, but then home for 3 in a row. Seattle, Carolina, Pittsburgh, and that'll get you through next week. So the Sabres are going to be at KeyBank Center for a few of these games coming up. And tonight, Alex Ovechkin. I got lot to say about Ovechkin later on in the show. He has been amazing all season. He got hurt, came back, has been just as good, and he is still on track. In fact, comfortably on track on this current trajectory, this current pace to break Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal record this season. And there is a chance, by the way, I'll give you the math on this later, what he's on pace for, how many games are left in the season. There's a chance that he could break the record later in the year against the Sabres. I'll tell you how close that is to his pace for that night to be the night later on in today's show. Before we get into, though, our big topic of today, which is about Vancouver Canucks superstar Elias Pettersson, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of buzz about Pettersson and a trade across the National Hockey League. Before we do that, though, quick recap of what we saw on Saturday. And I mean very quick because it was exactly what you would have anticipated. How could you have expected anything different? The best team in the Western Conference against the Sabres at home, and they were much the better team all night long, and you had to know Jack Eichel was going to get up for this game. Really no difference. He's been dominant all season. He's got 52 points in 39 games now. He's on a 110-point pace. So you would expect him to have the game he did, where he dominated possession. Every time his line was out on the ice, they were hemming the Sabres in, and he gets a really nice goal on a 2-on-1 finish. He has a really nice assist, cross ice to Mark Stone. It's what Jack Eichel does, and he'll twist the knife probably every time he plays the Sabres going forward. So, whatever. Move on. Eichel, he's amazing. He's out west. We don't have to think about him as much and be reminded of how good he is. The Sabres, though, in terms of their overall effort, they're outshot 33-24. Again, they don't really produce a lot of offense. They looked dead asleep, I thought, through the first 2 periods of play with very few shots on goal. I mean, they had 10 shots on goal through period 2, and they were tracking towards one of their lowest shout outputs in years. They got there. They got there with the 24, a lot of that in the third period. Jason Zucker, again, this guy, 5 power play goals in like the last 2 weeks. He has been amazing on the power play. He is up to 15 goals, and now Zucker has crossed into that 30-goal pace territory. And we did an episode on him last week, which you could check out, the merit of re-signing Zucker despite his age. The Sabres should, every time he plays, it's like, yep, they should hang on to that guy. They should try to pay that guy. I don't even know if they can. He probably wants to go take a shot to win a Stanley Cup this season, but maybe there's a contract out there where the Sabres could say, hey, this is worth your while. We're going to ask you to forego another shot at a cup in the name of we're going to give you a really good contract that you're going to have a hard time finding on the open market. I think that's warranted given the upcoming cap raise in the future. So that's all she wrote. Sabres lose 3-1 to Vegas, 14-21 and what's the 14-21-5 on the year, which is still dead last in the East and is now dead last in the East by 4 points. They can't get out of last tonight. They probably can't get out of last this week. And that whole idea of going into last week, I said, just shave a point off every week. That's it. That's the goal. Shave 1 point off every week, net a point in the standings, and get to 7 by today. And it's today. And how many points are the Sabres on a playoff spot? 11. 11. So they've actually lost ground. And they've gone far in the other direction. And now I don't even know if 1 point per week would even do it. So, yeah, they had that week with 3 straight losses. And what is it now? 16 of 19 have been losses. Got real fun. All right. Well, let's talk about something fun that relates to this team. Let's do it. Let's have some fun here. Let's play around in trade land. And most of these ideas are always going to be stopped dead cold in its tracks by but this player, fill in the blank, has a no movement clause, has a no trade clause, has a limited no trade clause. He's got 5 teams that he can say no to. You'd expect any list that has any amount of teams, the Sabres are going to be on it. So that's always the but. I talked about Chris Kreider as a trade idea last month, and I went through the merit of it. I went through the idea, why I liked it for the Sabres. Here was what it would cost. And the clouding over that whole episode or idea conversation is a little voice in the back of your head that's going, yeah, he would never come here. He would say no. He would nix the trade. It's not going to happen. And that does exist for a lot of the league, which is why I'm very excited today to talk about Elias Pettersson, the star number 1 center of the Vancouver Canucks, who has been the subject of trade rumors in recent weeks. And this goes back even 3-4 weeks to a rumored spat or disconnect between the Canucks' 2 best players, or I should say 2 best forwards, in Pettersson and JT Miller. That maybe there was trouble in paradise and those 2 weren't getting along and they're the best 2 players on the team. So that's usually a problem when that happens. That's kind of where everything started. But really more so it's been that Pettersson last year signed a long-term extension, a very long-term extension. He's under contract until 2032 at $11.6 million per year. Massive contract. He currently is the 4th highest paid player in the National Hockey League. 26 years old, 2032. So he's under contract until he's 33, 34 years old. That part's not that bad. It's more huge pay raise. And since he signed that extension, Pettersson has 48 points in 67 games. Not meeting the bar, not meeting expectation, not living up to the deal that he signed. And what's interesting about Pettersson, very different from, you might even like this, it's kind of a breath of fresh air, where every time you hear Kevyn Adams or someone else from the Sabres speak, but mostly it's Adams, about guys that are struggling. Dylan Cousins, Matthias Samuelsson, Owen Power at times, Tage usually is the injury thing, though, that last year was a realistic excuse. But whenever Cousins is a good one for this, but all those guys, when they're not meeting expectation, when they're not living up to their contracts, you often hear excuse making or, oh, no. This guy's actually doing better than you think. And that's often the messaging that comes from, KeyBank Center. Kind of a breath of fresh air, you might say. In Vancouver, their general manager sounding very different. Very, very different. Almost blasting, I would say, Pettersson in the media, or at least as close as you'll get to blasting. Patrick Alvin, the GM of Vancouver, told Sportsnet a week ago that Pettersson needs to understand that things only get harder in the NHL and that the 26-year-old center hasn't really accomplished anything yet, despite signing a $92 million extension with the Canucks last season. From the Sportsnet story about this from earlier in the week. That's some harsh criticism. Like, you haven't hey, Pettersson, remember, is like, this isn't Dylan Cousins, who had 160-point season and that's it. Like, Pettersson has had 60+ points every year of his career, except for 2020-21, where he missed a lot of it, and he had 21 points in 26 games. He, in recent years, has been even better than that. He had a 100-point season, 102 in 80 games 2 years ago, where he finished with a couple of hard votes, 7th for the Selke, All-Star, of course. Last year, 89 points in 82 games. This guy's put up a lot of production. This guy, by Sabre standards, has accomplished, good amount. He's made the playoffs. He's played in 30 playoff games in his time in Vancouver. They've won a couple of rounds. So, I get it, the sentiment of he hasn't accomplished anything. It's just funny to listen to that from here, this chair, and think man, 30 playoff games, a 100-point season, and 89, this guy's accomplished a lot, in my opinion, at least by comparison. So that was Alvin's comment, though, on Pettersson. And Pettersson, didn't really fight back on that. He got asked, and he said, no, I know. I agree with him. I've got to be better. I'm the first one to say it. He wasn't, though, here. The GM was. All that being said, the GM also got asked about the idea of trading Pettersson and Miller, the big guns, and he said everything's on the table. And then Elliot Friedman followed that up with that the Canucks are, quote, definitely looking at the market on both Pettersson and Miller. So, and this, by the way, I've mentioned Pettersson in brief passing when talking about Friedman, because Friedman had this weird idea. And usually when I brought this up, it's been more about Byram's end of it, because Friedman, in this mock trade that he thought of a month ago, had the idea of, hey, why don't the Sabres send Dylan Cousins and Bo Byram and go get Elias Pettersson from the Vancouver Canucks? Those would be two main pieces. There'd be more to the trade, whatever. And he mentioned in that Byram wanted to be a number one defenseman. And that's really the part of it that I've ran with in recent days and weeks is, interesting. Byram wants to be a number one defenseman, huh? We should really look at the Pettersson end of things, though. Friedman, the number one insider in hockey, who's pretty plugged in on these things. And even when he takes guesses, which I would qualify that mock trade idea as, even when he takes guesses, it is coming from a place of being educated on the market, being educated on who's available, what things are worth, right? Friedman has a good idea of what things are worth because he talks to GMs and agents every day. He would know better than me. He would know better than you, the listener, what not what maybe things should be worth, but what things are worth. And that was the trade he came up with. Pettersson to Buffalo. Now, we'll get to the value momentarily. This is why this idea is exciting to me. You right now might be thinking this is the same as any other trade idea. He's just going to say no. Despite the fact that Pettersson signed that massive contract, today, on January 6th, 2025, Elias Pettersson has no trade protection. Zip. He's got nothing. It kicks in this summer. So they have, if they were to want to move on him, then they'd have to act now or at the trade deadline or this summer. But between now and then, So this guy cannot tell them no. And that's important because you could still say that, and I would hope Adams wouldn't do this. I think in recent years, he probably would. I wonder, though, if right now he would be different. 2 years ago, I bet you if Kevyn Adams called the Canucks about Elias Pettersson and they had the value worked out, and he asked, does he want to come here? And the answer was no. Or the agent said, yeah, he doesn't want to play in Buffalo. Then he would probably walk away from it because the whole messaging, the whole idea of the team was we want players that want to be here. And I don't think they would have taken a risk like that 2 years ago. Now, though, you're telling me he doesn't have trade protection and I could trade for him and he's got to come here. And you don't want to hold a guy hostage, but at the same time, you could probably tell him, listen, make the best of it because we have you now. This is what that contract protection is so crazy that he doesn't have it right now. Is Vancouver could trade him to the Sabres and he could want no part of being here. And it's like tough. You're under contract till 2032. 2032. And there's nothing you could do about it other than hold out or make things, extremely, extremely ugly. But I don't know. I don't want to just make the connection because they're both Swedish, but maybe Pettersson and Dahlin have some sort of relationship from their time with the national teams and whatnot. The captain of the team maybe could help that along. I don't know. But he's free and available. Not free, but he's available for the Sabres to get. And that's very different from a lot of other top players that we've discussed. So when we come back, now let's get into what the Sabres would have to give up and just how good is this player. Because as I mentioned, he's been struggling as of late. But this is a level of player that doesn't become available very often. This is an Eichel level trade. This is an Eichel level player that when Eichel got traded, remember, that was rare. And one of those rare times has been put in front of us from Vancouver. Let's get to all of that when we come back here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are so much better with FanDuel because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Check out tonight's odds for this game. If you want to bet against Buffalo and you want to go with Ovechkin as he chases Gretzky's record, he's on fire as of late, then you can go check out some anytime goal bets. Or, hey, maybe you want to fade that idea and think, those odds are crazy. Let me go the other way. Really looking at a lot of Ovechkin props for tonight. Nice to have a little action on a Buffalo hockey game when, there's not a lot of stakes in the standings. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season for football coming up unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Happy Monday. The Sabres go into week with a couple of games starting tonight against Washington. The Vancouver Canucks, subject of a lot of trade rumors. Everybody's having their turn. You search Elias Pettersson right now, and you're going to find Rangers blogs talking about what to give up for him, and Islanders fans, and Ducks fans. Everybody, every team in the league, every fan base in the league, every blog site is talking about Pettersson and what you would give up for him. Even if it's still, I might want to bet against them trading him because he's under contract for so long and he is so good, but they're allowing the fire to grow here. I think the GM has added fuel to the fire. I think you've got the top insider in the sport adding fuel to the fire. Like, they're not doing anything to slow down these trade rumors in Vancouver right now, in my opinion. So, how good is Pettersson, and what would the Sabres realistically have to give up for him, given that because he doesn't have trade protection, the good news is the Sabres can get in that ball game. The bad news is everybody can. And that means a 31-32 team bidding, 31 team bidding war could take place because anybody in the league can get their hands on him. And he can't say no. Let's start with how good the player is. I compared him to Eichel last segment, and there might not be the exact same style-wise, but we're talking about a 26-year-old center from Sweden who has had big seasons in the past. His career at this point, he's actually 1 point below a point per game player, 440 points in 441 games. So almost a point a game player, which is, good, very good. Now, it took him 4 years to go from a really good second line center to, this guy's a top level number one center. But then, as I threw that stat out earlier, 48 points his last 67 games. In the last 67 games, he has regressed back to, this guy's producing more like a number two center right now, which is certainly not worth $11.6 million. But if you're a team that has a belief that the number one center, the 100-point player is still in there, then that's why you trade for the guy. That's why you take a shot at him. And I have no reason to believe that player is not still in there. He is dynamic. He is so skilled with the puck. He is such a good finisher. 39 goals and 3 consecutive 39-goal season 2 years ago, 30-plus in 3 consecutive years. He's a very good playmaker. He was struggling early on in his career defensively. That has really come along in the last 2-3 years. Again, that's kind of comparable to Eichel. Eichel became a dominant defensive player in his last year or two in Buffalo and then in Vegas. So I love Pettersson as a player, and I know he struggled as of late, but I love the idea. I love the player, and I just don't think it's realistic that the Sabres would get an opportunity to get a guy like this for years and years. You have no idea when a player of this caliber, without trade protection, that's under contract at this age, would even be thought of as being available. That's why, if I'm the Sabres, I am all in. There's no trade idea I would have ever been more all in on in the last 2-3 seasons than this, because of how good he is. Now, if you want to look at some totals, in the last 3 seasons, Pettersson has better than a point per game, 219 points in 196 games, 1.12 points per game. That is the 16th most points in the NHL in that time. Here are the only names. I mean, this is the company he's in terms of points in the last few years. 1 fewer point than Jack Hughes, 1 fewer point than Austin Matthews, a lot fewer goals than Matthews, but the same amount of points. Couple fewer points than William Nylander, 10 fewer points than Sidney Crosby in the last 3 years, 11 fewer points than Braden Point. Like, these are the players that he's in company with. Who is he better than? His teammate JT Miller right below him, Clayton Keller, Tim Stützle, Sebastian Aho, Brady Tkachuk, Kyle Connor, Alex Barkov, he's above, Steven Stamkos, Zibanejad, Eichel. Eichel's played a lot fewer games. Eichel 1.10, 1.12. Again, there's a comparable statistically. Better than Mark Scheifele, John Tavares, Malkin, just the list goes on and on. He's a top-level number one center. He's not the best. He's not McDavid. He's not McKinnon, but he's that tier 2 number one center in the NHL when he's at his best. If you look at the advanced numbers, playing around with evolving hockey and some of their charts, I love their player cards. I like the percentile ranks for goals above replacement at their position. And if you go over a 3-year sample size, the last 3 years for Pettersson, his percentile rank offensively among forwards is in the 94th percentile. Defensively, he's in the 78th percentile. Top notch. Now, again, to point to his struggles, this year, he's in the 59th percentile offensively, which is by far the worst in years for him. And he's in the 70th percentile defensively. So he's still giving you great defensive production. He's giving you good offensive production, but not near what you're paying for. All that being said, what would it cost to get this guy? And keep in mind, I think because of the no trade clause, the fact that there is no trade clause in this contract, you are going to have to overpay because everybody's going to want a piece of this action. Everybody is going to want in on this player. So maybe you would think this is even an overpayment enough. I don't think you're in the ball game unless you are willing to overpay. Here's the trade proposal that I got for you. And I will say this is inspired by one texter who, shout out to him, because he has been all over this idea. He has been blitzkrieg texting me for 2 weeks on our group chat. By the way, if you want to become a Locked On Sabres text club member, join subtext.com/LockedOnSabres. We've had one listener who has been all over this idea. He badly wants Pettersson. He's texting me almost daily about it. And I'll read you his most recent text about Pettersson, saying, oh, I lost it here. Hold on 1 second. Here we go. On Pettersson and what it would cost to get him. I'm sorry I got to bust in on this Pettersson trade again, but it's asinine if Adams doesn't do it. Cousins, Byram, unprotected first for Pettersson. Tyler Myers, top 5 protected first. They should absolutely do it. Would be a trade in a heartbeat for both sides. You upgrade massively with Pettersson while Vancouver gets a cheaper number 2 center to replace Pettersson. Byram for Myers would be a no-brainer. Vancouver would get a top defenseman who is really great. Buffalo would get a big right-handed defenseman to play with power. The first swap would push it over the edge, leaves ours unprotected. We're going to finish near the bottom. It's a good pick. Could be at the top. Then you switch Vancouver, but top 5 protected. Okay, so a lot there, but it's the spirit of it. I'm going to adjust my trade idea for Pettersson a little bit, but it's inspired by that idea where Cousins, Byram, like Friedman. Texter's not super original either. Like I kind of like the creativity of you give them an unprotected first with a shot to be number 1, and in exchange, you get their first back, but their pick can't be top 5 that you get. I like the creativity there. This goes back to Friedman. Friedman mentioning Cousins and mentioning Byram. And Byram, I think, even more so. Here's the idea for me. Cousins, Byram, and this year's first. I am going to top 5 protect that pick, though, because even though this is not a year with a generational prospect, there's a good player in Hagens coming up, and I would not want to trade the potential of that pick away. I would top 5 protect it with Byram and Cousins and get Pettersson, and I'll steal or borrow the texter's idea of Tyler Myers back. Myers, who is not good anymore at all, but he can fill minutes for you. He could be a little bit bigger, tough nose guy for you. He's a right shot, which come at a premium in the league today. He's playing 20 minutes a night again for Vancouver this season. Like, he could play on my second pair. Fine. Like, I don't think he's great. I think it might even really kill you some nights, but is he better than what Power has had to play with? I think that probably is, it's a close one. Maybe it's a yes. So I'm also doing the Canucks a service by taking 3 years, $3 million a year off their books for a 34-year-old Tyler Myers. I feel like I'm helping them out by taking out a bad contract. So that's the idea. Cousins, Byram, a first that's protected top 5 for Pettersson and Myers. Now, you might be saying, maybe you disagree. Maybe you don't think that is enough. I would bet, though, most would say that's too much because Byram, it depends what you think of Byram, maybe. I think Byram's amazing. I think he's a great player. I think he's a legit top pair defenseman in the league. I think his desire to be a number 1 is a little ambitious, but I think he's a top pair defenseman in the league. And I think on another team without a Rasmus Dahlin on it, if he was on the number 1 power play unit, we'd be talking about a near point a game defenseman. I mean, he's top notch in 5-on-5 scoring on the year. So I don't think that's even much of a stretch. He's got contract control. He's an RFA at the end of the year. Vancouver maybe would think they can get that deal done. And then Cousins, who goes closer to home, right? Like closer. Whitehorse is far from everywhere. It's like 20 hours from Vancouver, but Vancouver's a lot closer than it is here. So, Cousins get to go back to Western Canada. He's getting interest around the league. Like, all the reports are that teams want in. The Vultures are swooping. So Vancouver being one of those teams that wants in on him would not be a surprise. He could fill in that center vacancy that Pettersson would be leaving, although maybe you'd go Miller as the number 1 center, and you'd go down to Cousins is your number 2 center and think you get better results. And you get a first, which, listen, it might be top 5 protected, but what's that pick going to be? Between 5 and 10? And if it is top 5 next year, you're going to get it. And you're taking a bet against the Buffalo Sabres. It's generally a pretty decent bet. It's probably going to be top 10 next season. So that's a pretty valuable first round pick. And that's maybe where you could outbid other teams. Is your draft pick is more valuable than Tampa's draft pick. Your draft pick's more valuable than Toronto's first round pick. And Byram, I think, I think he's the number 1 piece of that trade. Cousins too. It's 3 pieces, and you could even qualify Myers as a 4th piece because it's a bad contract. 4 pieces for 1. and you get Elias Pettersson. And I think you plug him right in, and he's your number one center. And Tage Thompson could slide to number 2, or maybe you want to move Thompson to wing. I would not do that. I would go 1-2, Pettersson number 1, Thompson number 2, and suddenly you're cooking with gas. You got a great top 6. You got a super talented 1-2 center punch, the likes of which very few teams in the league have. That's my idea. Give me yours. You can get creative with it. I liked our texter and how creative he got with the first round pick swap. One's protected, one isn't. Let me know what you think about Elias Pettersson and whether or not he'll be traded. But Kevyn Adams absolutely should be in on this. All right. When we come back, Sabres and Capitals. Ovechkin's in town. And it might be the only time that Ovechkin is here again before being the all-time goal king. We'll talk about tonight's game when we come back here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is presented by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? I mean, I'm walking around with, I got almost every subscription, and sometimes I forget which ones I have. And then if that does happen, I often wonder, like, do I have 2 Peacock subscriptions? Or do I have 2 of this, 2 of that? And I wouldn't know because, I'm if I forget one, then I'll go, I want to sign up for this. And I sign up for it, not realizing I already had one. Rocket Money takes care of it. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. Had a few subscriptions I didn't even realize that I was still paying for. That's happened to me. Whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year, Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. So for me, check it out. I had one subscription, not like one that you would ever know about. It was more of like a under the radar one a couple of years ago. And I had the subscription for 4 years and didn't know. It wasn't that expensive, but still, like, adds up over time. Like, I've had this for this long. Rocket Money would have taken care of it if I had done it earlier. So check it out. Rocket Money. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions. Reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. It's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Back here in the Locked On Sabres podcast, the Sabres and the Caps tonight. Ovechkin's in town, and he has been unbelievable all season long. I can't believe how good Ovechkin has been for the Capitals this year. Last year, it seemed like he was slowing down and was also on a team that might not be good enough to get him the puck in scoring areas anymore. Well, Capitals look great. Number 1 in the Metro, which is way out of nowhere for me. I could not believe they've had this season. And Ovechkin has 19 goals in 23 games. He had 31 all last year. 19 in 23 games, almost a goal per game. In fact, he is who we are locked in on. We usually do this for a Sabre player. We're doing it for Ovechkin tonight because he's chasing the record, and it's the biggest story in the league this year. And I think he's going to do it. 0.82 goals per game this season for Alex Ovechkin. He has 23 more goals to go to break the record. 22 to tie Gretzky, 23 to break the record, and he's got 43 games to go. So I don't expect him to stay at 0.82 goals per game all year. But if he were to, he's currently on track to break the record on Tuesday, March 18th at home against Detroit. And that's with a good amount of games left in the schedule. He'll probably slow down at least a little bit. And that's where the Sabres come in. Who's he going to do it against? Because the Sabres will be playing meaningless games most likely by that time. But if Ovechkin's going for the record, that's not a meaningless game. That game, he's on pace to break it. Detroit. Only 5 games later, the Capitals play the Sabres at home on March 30th. And that Sabre game in Washington on a Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock, by the way, where they could put that game on national TV. That game is sandwiched between 4 road games. 2 road games before, 2 road games after. If there is any desire to get Ovechkin that goal at home, which the Capitals are going to want to do, if I were them, I would want to do it on a night at the arena I could sell 1 million tickets, not 1 million tickets. You can only sell so many, but sell a ton price wise for those tickets. And I'd want to do it on home ice. Well, that Sabre game kind of stands out. It's 1 out of 5, a 5-game stretch in March into April where the Sabre game is the only home game. So I kind of I'm staring at that game. That really might be the game. He'll have to drop off a little bit, but I think that's very likely. But anyways, Ovechkin's been incredible all year long. He looks good. Like, he's skating fine. He is shooting the puck as good as he ever has. That part of his game hasn't slowed down. They have been getting him the puck on even strength. He's only got 5 of the 19 on the power play, so he hasn't just had to be a power play merchant all year. He's been able to do it at 5-on-5, which points to it being a little more sustainable and not as fluky. So all in all, Ovechkin's been incredible. And man, how do you bet against him to score a goal tonight against the Buffalo Sabres? The Sabres, by the way, we'll get into what they've got going on. We expect Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen in goal. And lines. So Tage Thompson, right wing. He played right wing in the last couple of games as well. He's been dealing with an injury. That kind of went under the radar because he just hasn't been taking face-offs, I guess, but got played with Cousins a little bit. And in this game, Cousins looks like he's going to be the number 1 center with Thompson on his right wing full time, and then Zucker on the left, McLeod with Tuck and Peterka on line 2, Kulik, Benson, Krebs line 3, Lafferty, Quinn, Obe-Kubel on line 4. Henry Haru checks back into the lineup for the first time in 6 games. He's been a healthy scratch as you've got a couple of guys that are dealing with some sickness. I think Malenstein's dealing with a sickness. So, yeah, that's what the Sabres lineup looks like for tonight. And we'll get to our sneaky parlay for tonight's game between the Sabres and the Capitals. And let's kick things off with the obvious. I'm going to go with Alex Ovechkin to score a goal. It's plus 120, which is wild, but man, he's doing, if you're betting plus 120 every night on him this year, you're ahead. So Ovechkin plus 120 is where we're going to kick things off for our parlay for tonight. I am going to take the Capitals on the money line, minus 164, betting against the Sabres on the road. And then finally, I'm going to bet Jason Zucker to record a point in this game. I don't want to go for a goal. I'm going to go with a point. He's on the number 1 power play unit. He's on the number 1 line. He's getting opportunities. He's getting ice time. You know, maybe he gets an assist and I cash it that way. So I'm going to go for a little bit better odds than if I had picked him to score. And that's going to get me to plus 510. Nothing crazy. Ovechkin, Capitals to win. Ovechkin to score, Capitals to win, and then Zucker to record a point for plus 510, 10 to win 51, 100 to win 510, and so on and so forth. All right. Enjoy the game. It's going to do it for us. Check out our text club. Join subtext.com/LockedOnSabres. You got a thought on the Elias Pettersson trade, hit us up there, or you can do it on Twitter at Sneaky Joe Sports, or I'm on Blue Sky at Sneaky Joe as well. Enjoy Sabres and Capitals, and check out Joe Marino, Locked On Bills, as the Bills get the Broncos in the playoffs. Start getting some playoff episodes in. And Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Steal and Flip, got you covered throughout the week. Also, check out our sister shows. All right, talk to you tomorrow here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.